Jonah Ellis had dreamed of this moment for weeks, just him, his newborn son, and the stillness of the woods. The old family cabin sat at the edge of a quiet lake in northern Maine, tucked far from noise, phone signals, or sudden obligations. Mornings here started slow. He'd brew a strong cup of coffee, swaddle Leo against his chest, and step out onto the porch to watch the fog lift off the water like breath. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was healing. After months of sleepless nights, freelance deadlines, and trying to keep things afloat while Raphael worked overseas, Jonah had finally carved out space for rest. Leo, just 5 weeks old, seemed to respond to it too, his cries less frantic, his sleep more settled. Jonah was figuring things out, slowly. Sure, there were diapers, dishes, laundry piles, and the nagging sense that he wasn't doing enough, but there were also long naps, small smiles from Leo, and the grounding rhythm of nature around them. He had needed this badly. No clients, no meetings, no relatives, just peace. The kind of peace that lets you breathe fully for the first time in months. Jonah rocked gently in the porch chair, his son against his chest, drifting in and out of a light nap. The world felt safe again, at least for now. He didn't know it, but this calm would be gone within the hour, and the next few days would push him closer to the edge than he'd ever been. The sound of tires on gravel snapped Jonah out of his light doze. He sat up, Leo still asleep on his chest, and squinted down the driveway. A silver SUV was pulling in, kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop. His brow furrowed. No one was supposed to be visiting. He wasn't expecting deliveries, and his phone hadn't buzzed with a heads up, though, out here, signal was spotty at best. The driver's door swung open and out stepped his aunt, Darlene, in her usual oversized sunglasses and floral scarf, already waving as she approached. Jonah stood slowly, shifting Leo into one arm. "Darlene?" he called, confused. "What are you—" Before he could finish, the back doors opened and 3 kids spilled out. His sister Maya's children, Calvin, Hazel, and little Ezra. Each of them had a backpack and wide eyes. "What is going on?" Jonah asked, now fully awake. Darling breezed past him toward the porch, arms spread. "Maya and I are headed to Croatia, bit of a last-minute trip. She said you're off work, so—" She gestured vaguely toward the children. "They'll be with you until the 15th. Should be fine, right? You've got the space." Jonah blinked, stunned. "Wait, what? Darling, you can't just—" "Gotta run. Flights don't wait," she said with a cheery smile, patting Jonah on the arm. She leaned into the car window and called out, "Behave for Uncle Jonah." Then, just like that, she got in, reversed down the drive, and was gone. The dust settled around Jonah as the 3 kids stood there silently, staring up at him. Leo began to squirm in his arms. Jonah swallowed hard. The piece was officially over. Within 20 minutes, Jonah's quiet, tidy cabin had transformed into a miniature war zone. Calvin, the oldest at 8, was already tearing through the rooms like he was searching for hidden treasure. Hazel, 6, wandered silently behind him, leaving a trail of granola bar crumbs as she explored. Ezra, just 3, clung to Jonah's leg, whimpering that he wanted his mom. Jonah bounced Leo gently in one arm, trying to keep him asleep while simultaneously wrangling the chaos unfolding around him. "Okay, let's all sit down for a second," he said, voice tight. No one listened. A toy box was overturned, crayons were scattered across the floor, and someone had found the emergency flashlight and was shining it directly into Leo's face. "Stop! Stop! Guys, please!" Jonah finally barked, louder than he meant to. Jonah's stomach dropped. This was already spiraling. He headed to the kitchen to get snacks, hoping food would settle them. The fridge was nearly empty. A half a ton of eggs, mustard, an open jar of applesauce, and oat milk. No sign of kid-friendly meals, no note, no plan. He opened cabinets, pasta, rice, some peanut butter. Not much else. Darlene had dropped off 3 children and hadn't thought to leave a single grocery bag. He pulled out his phone, no signal. He raised it toward the ceiling, walked outside, stood on the porch, and finally got one bar. He texted Maya. "What the hell is going on? You can't just leave your kids like this." No reply. He tried calling, straight to voicemail. He left a message, biting down frustration, but already knowing she wouldn't respond. Then he tried Darlene. No answer. Back inside, Leo was crying again. Ezra had emptied a box of cereal onto the floor. Hazel had pulled out a board game and was trying to play it alone, frustrated and huffing. Calvin had disappeared into the bedroom. Jonah felt the beginnings of a headache throb behind his eyes. He was one man with 4 small kids. No food, no warning, and no support. He looked around the cabin, his supposed sanctuary, and realized it had turned into a holding pen. And the worst part? This was only the first afternoon. By the second night, Jonah was running on fumes. The baby barely slept, waking every couple of hours, and Ezra had started coughing. Deep, chesty, and unsettling. By morning, the toddler was burning up with a fever. Jonah dug through the travel bag Darlene had left behind. No medicine, no thermometer, just a few diapers and a crumpled drawing Hazel had made. Panic pricked at the edges of his nerves. He searched the cabin's tiny medicine cabinet, finally finding an expired bottle of children's fever reducer. It would have to do. He measured out a careful dose, hoping it wouldn't make things worse. Ezra fought the spoon, crying, kicking, coughing harder. Jonah had to pin him gently against his own chest, while trying not to drop Leo, who was also now fussing in his sling. "It's okay, buddy," Jonah whispered, his voice hoarse, sweat beading at his hairline. "You're okay." The other 2 kids weren't making things any easier. Calvin had turned restless energy into full-on rebellion, ignoring Jonah's instructions and egging Hazel into pulling the cushions off the couch. Hazel refused to eat anything except toast, and they were now out of bread. Jonah made a list of groceries, considered loading all 4 kids into the car, then stared at the keys in his hands and realized how insane that would be. He called Maya again, straight to voicemail. Tried calling. "Ezra has a fever. I need help," he texted. Message delivered. No reply. He tried Raphael next. It rang once, then voicemail. Jonah left a clipped message. "Please call me. I need backup." But even as he said the words, he knew Raphael couldn't help from across the ocean. The loneliness was brutal. 4 kids in a house built for one, a newborn needing constant attention, the oldest climbing bookshelves, Ezra crying in his sleep. No answers, no support. Jonah felt like he was juggling knives on a high wire, with no net and no one watching. It wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. And he was only 3 days in. Jonah didn't remember falling asleep, only waking up on the living room floor, face pressed against a stray Lego. It was 3 a.m. Leo was crying again. Ezra had soaked through his pajamas. The house smelled like stale food, diapers, and panic. He sat up slowly, every muscle aching, and shuffled to the crib to pick up his son. His hands trembled. He hadn't eaten since lunch the day before, and he'd barely slept in 3 nights. The silence between cries felt heavier than the noise itself. He rocked Leo half-heartedly, staring at the dark window as if it might offer some kind of answer. When Leo finally calmed, Jonah carried him to the couch and collapsed, too tired to make it to the bedroom. A soft sound made him look up. Hazel stood in the hallway, blanket in one hand, thumb in her mouth. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Jonah nodded and patted the couch. She climbed up next to him silently, curling against his arm. The pressure of everything. 4 lives resting on him. No help, no sleep. Closed in. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. The room swam. Jonah placed Leo down gently and stumbled toward the bathroom, gripping the doorframe to stay upright. He looked in the mirror and saw someone unrecognizable. Dark circles, bloodshot eyes, hair sticking out in all directions. He gripped the sink as the first wave hit. His heart pounded like a drum, throat tight, skin clammy. He was having a panic attack. The realization only made it worse. He crouched down on the cold tile floor, fists pressed against his temples, willing it to stop. Voices echoed behind him, Ezra whimpering, Hazel asking where he went. Jonah couldn't move, couldn't answer, couldn't fix anything. All the calm he'd fought to build in the cabin, all the control was gone. He wasn't the sturdy, capable parent he wanted to be. He was drowning. He wanted to scream or run or vanish, but instead he stayed crouched, silent, with tears burning in his eyes. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't sustainable. He couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change, because if it didn't, he was going to break for real. By morning, Jonah knew he couldn't fake it anymore. His body felt hollow, like someone had scooped the life out of him and left only the reflex to keep moving. Ezra's fever hadn't broken. Hazel was sulking under the kitchen table, and Calvin had taken it upon himself to fix the clogged sink using a butter knife. Leo cried every time Jonah put him down, and Jonah's hands shook when he tried to make toast. He caught his reflection in the microwave door, unshaven, eyes dull, shirt stained, and realized he looked exactly how he felt. Done. He took a breath, grabbed his phone, and made the call he'd been avoiding out of pride and fear of judgment. "Hey, Olivia? It's Jonah. I need a favor." Olivia, his nearest neighbor, a retired nurse in her late 50s with no-nonsense kindness, didn't even hesitate. "Of course, Jonah, what's going on?" He gave her a clipped version. Surprise kids, fever, no sleep, losing control. She didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in 20. You get dressed, I'll handle the rest." And just like that, someone was in his corner. When she arrived, Jonah barely had the energy to speak. He handed over notes on feeding and naps like a soldier passing command before collapsing into the driver's seat of his car. He didn't even know where he was going, just away for a breath. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled out. He wasn't running. He was surviving. For the first time in days, he was finally doing something for himself. Jonah drove straight into town, his heart pounding not from anxiety this time, but from resolve. He hadn't showered, he hadn't rehearsed, but he was done being polite. He pulled up to Patricia and Jean's modest, neatly trimmed house, Maya's in-laws, and turned off the engine. For a long moment he sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel. Then he stepped out, walked up the front path, and rang the bell. Patricia answered, wearing reading glasses and a look of mild surprise. "Jonah, is everything all right?" Jonah's voice was low, steady. "Not really. Can I come in?" Inside, the house was warm, scented with coffee and lemon-scented cleaner. He sat at their kitchen table and didn't sugarcoat it. Darlene had dumped the kids at his cabin, Maya was unreachable, and he hadn't slept more than a couple hours in days. Ezra had a fever, Calvin had nearly broken a window, Hazel hadn't spoken more than 5 words to him all day. "I have my own infant to care for. This isn't safe, for them or for me." Patricia covered her mouth in shock. Jean sat forward slowly in his chair, his brow furrowed. "You've had all 3 of them? Alone? With Leo?" Jonah nodded. 4 days now. No warning, no supplies, no help. I've been begging for someone to answer the phone. There was a silence that felt heavier than any shouting match. Finally, Jean spoke. "We didn't know. If we had, this never would have happened." Patricia reached over, touching Jonah's hand. "We'll take them. Today. You shouldn't have been put in that position." Jonah swallowed hard, the weight lifting off him so fast it made his eyes sting. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I just couldn't do it anymore." Patricia shook her head. "You didn't cause this. They did. And we'll talk to Maya when she's back." Jonah stood, exhausted but relieved. He had spoken up. He had drawn a line, and someone, finally, had listened. Back at the cabin, the silence hit differently. The kids were gone. Picked up within hours, just as Patricia promised, and Jonah stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by scattered toys, empty cups, and tiny socks. The chaos still lingered in the air, but without the sound of crying or crashing, it felt ghostly. He laid Leo down in his bassinet and sat heavily at the kitchen table. For the first time in days, his hands were steady. The weight had lifted, but the exhaustion still clung to him like fog. He stared at the notepad he kept by the coffee machine, flipped it open, and started writing. Not to Maya, not to Darlene, but to himself. A record, a boundary, a line in ink that no one would be allowed to cross again. Next time, ask. Next time I say no. Next time, I walk away before it wrecks me. The words came in short, sharp bursts. He didn't want to rant. He wanted clarity. Truth. He wrote a simple letter to Darlene. You used me. That won't happen again. I have my own son, my own life, and this time I choose us. He snapped a photo of the note and texted it to Maya and Darlene both. No explanation, just the letter. Then he put his phone on the shelf and left it there. For the first time in nearly a week, he took a long shower, scrubbed off the noise, the pressure, the helplessness. When he stepped out and saw Leo sleeping peacefully in his cradle, he exhaled, slow and deep. The storm had passed. He had survived it. And now, finally, he could start reclaiming his space. The next morning, Jonah packed a small bag, buckled Leo into the car seat, and drove to Portland. His mother's apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building with ivy crawling up the walls. He didn't call ahead. He didn't need to. When she opened the door, still in her robe, she didn't ask a single question, just pulled him into a long hug. "You're home," she whispered. Jonah broke down in her arms, the dam finally cracking. Exhaustion, frustration, and guilt poured out in quiet sobs. That night, after a warm meal and a long overdue nap, he told her everything. About the drop-off, the fever, the panic attack, the helplessness. She listened without interrupting, just holding his hand as he spoke. When he finally finished, she nodded and said, "You did everything you could, and more than you should have had to." Jonah looked at her, eyes raw. "I don't think I'm built for this," he said quietly. She smiled, tired and soft. "None of us are. Not alone, and definitely not without a choice." Her words landed like a balm. For the first time, Jonah felt seen, not judged for reaching his limit, not shamed for needing help, just seen. He knew there were hard conversations ahead, with Raphael, with Maya, with Darlene. But he also knew now he wasn't powerless. He'd proven something to himself in those long, sleepless nights. That surviving didn't make him weak. It made him strong. Still tired, still healing, but no longer afraid to speak up, and that was the first step back to himself. 2 days later, the responses started rolling in. Maya sent a string of messages, defensive and dripping with guilt. Shifting. "You could handle it better. It was just a few days. I thought you'd be fine." Jonah didn't reply. He forwarded the letter again with no comment. Then came Darlene's voicemail. Angry, theatrical, demanding to know how he could abandon family like that. Jonah deleted it before she'd finished. What shook him wasn't their anger. It was how calm he felt in the face of it. He no longer needed to argue or explain. They'd shown who they were. He'd shown who he was now, too. When Raphael finally called from overseas, his voice was tense, ready for a fight. But Jonah didn't fight. He spoke plainly, outlining what had happened, what he'd endured, and what would never happen again. "I need you to be a partner, not a distant witness," he said. Raphael was quiet for a long time. "You're right," he finally said. "I wasn't there. I'm sorry." Jonah didn't offer forgiveness, not yet, but he nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, the ground beneath him felt solid. He had found his line, and he wasn't afraid to stand behind it. That evening, back at the cabin, Jonah stepped out onto the porch with Leah nestled against his chest. The air was crisp, the lake still, the sky streaked in fading gold. The toys had been packed away, the floor swept clean, and the silence had returned. Not the eerie, loaded silence from before, but a welcome one. Peaceful. Earned. Jonah sat in the old rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth as Leah dozed off against him. He watched the sun dip below the trees, breathing in the quiet like medicine. He didn't know what would happen with Raphael, or if Maya would ever really understand what she'd done. But that didn't matter tonight. He had survived the chaos. He had found his voice. And more than that, he had reclaimed the space that was meant for healing, not survival. The porch creaked softly under his feet, a reminder that things would always move, shift, change, but some lines once drawn didn't need to blur again. Jonah kissed the top of Leo's head and whispered, "We're okay now." The baby stirred but stayed asleep, and for the first time in a long time, so would Jonah. The story of Jonah Ellis reminds us that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. Too often, people are expected to carry more than they can handle simply because they seem capable or are too polite to say no. Jonah's breaking point came not from weakness, but from being pushed past the edge by others' irresponsibility. And his turning point wasn't heroic, it was honest. He asked for help, he stood up for himself, and he stopped explaining his worth to those who took it for granted. That's the real lesson. You're allowed to draw the line. You're allowed to protect your peace, even if it makes others uncomfortable. If Jonah's journey hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Like this post to support real stories about mental health, burnout, and boundaries. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that reflect the emotional struggles behind everyday lives. And most importantly, share this story with someone who needs the reminder. You don't have to do it all. And you're not alone.